Do you know what time it is? It's time to make clocks. Welcome to Jamie Dove, Florida Pottery, and in this episode I will show you my success and failure in making ceramic timepieces. I am fortunate enough to have a slab roller, and it is a lot of fun coming up with ideas for stuff to make using slabs. One day I decided I wanted to build a sea turtle clock. So I did, and then I decided to expand on the clock idea, and that took me down a rabbit's hole, much like all creative ideas do. Check it out. This project started out with some clay and a slab roller. I had an idea in my head of what I wanted to make, and I just went at it. I started out by rolling out a slab. I've learned when rolling slabs, as you step down the thickness of the clay, it's important to alternate the direction the clay is being rolled. This is supposed to prevent warping. Every time I change the thickness, I rotate the clay 90 degrees. I used a bat as a circle template to cut out the clock face. The fresh clay is a little moist to work with, so I'll leave this alone for a little while to firm up. In the meantime, I cut some strips from the slab to form the base of the clock. I left the strips out uncovered under a fan, and they got a little too firm, but they're still usable. I just wet them a little bit to bring back some flexibility. I use a stainless steel mixing bowl as a form. I wrap a couple clay strips around the bowl. I'll mark the clay, then I'll cut the clay at an angle, so when I join the two parts, there's plenty of clay to blend together. I use a wooden tool to blend the clay. I go over the entire ring to make sure that it is even. I'll leave this to firm up with another ring that I made for another clock I'm making. Now I get back to the slab circle I left to firm up a while ago. The first thing I need to do is find and mark the center of the clock. Next, I mark the different hours using a compass dialed into the correct width. I can go completely around the clock and make sure that each mark is exact and accurately spaced. Now that the clock face is marked, I'm going to decorate it with some starfish and seashell sprigs. Knowing that I have to make 12 sprigs, I make them in advance to expedite the building of the clock. I score the spot for the first starfish, add some slip, and attach the sprig. Now I just have to repeat that process 11 more times. Once the sprigs are in place, I let the clock sit for a while to firm up so I can attach the ring to the back of the clock. It's been a while now. The clock is firm and it's time to attach the back. I score a circle on the back of the clock. I add some slip. I put the ring in place. Using coils, I reinforce the joins to make for a sturdy connection. I always keep in mind that anything that hangs needs to be strong enough to support its own weight. Now it's time for this one to dry. While in a clockmaking mindset, it seemed that everything I looked at had the potential to become a clock. Now, while recording an episode on throwing large bowls, I had a very saturated bowl flop right on the wheel head. Normally, I would have said a few more surly words than I did, but this time I saw the potential in the fail. Recognizing the circular shape and the cool little wave that the flop created, I decided to spare it from the recycle bucket. Instead, I let it sit overnight to firm up. The next day, I cut the flop off the bat and flipped it over. I centered it and then trimmed the bottom off. The bottom of the flop bowl is now going to be the clock face. Much like the previous clock, I find the center of this clock. I use a compass to correctly gauge the space between the hour marks. Once all that is done, I attach the sprigs to the appropriate marks. I used sprig molds of sea turtles coming out of their shells and hatchling sea turtles as hour markers. Time to let this one dry. While I let the clocks dry for a few days, it's time to source clock mechanisms. First thing I did, Google it. Then I saw what a simple little clock mechanism costs. I came up with a plan B. I hit the local Goodwill thrift store. I picked up a couple of clocks for under $3 each. It's been a few days and I look at all three slab clocks and it looks like they are starting to warp. It's hard to tell in the video. I let them dry face down on pillows so they wouldn't droop as they dried, but they seem to be warped. I've bisque fired and it's time to drill holes. Normally I would have pierced the pieces while they were green. For the life of me, I can't tell you why I didn't. I've drilled bisque before with a masonry bit and had no trouble. This one was giving me a fit. It was not a pretty hole and I was not happy with the way it went. So naturally, I tried it again with similar but slightly better results. I have a diamond bit, but it was too small. After a trip to the big orange hardware store, I got a 1/2-inch diamond bit and went to town on the clock. It made such a big difference using the right tool. I've got everything glazed and ready to load into the kiln. After what looked to be a successful firing, I noticed something odd about the Starfish clock. After pulling everything out of the kiln and inspecting the wares, the Starfish seashell clock had snapped in half. It was a fear I had because in the bisque fire, a large bowl blew up and impacted the clock. There was only a tiny little ding in the clock. As I looked at the two pieces, I can only imagine the stress this piece was under to buckle and snap. The warp is so bad that the two pieces don't even come close to fitting, which tells me it happened early in the firing. When I ran my fingers across the glaze edge, it was smooth and rounded, unlike the underside of the break, where the edge was still razor sharp. Seeing the glaze on the face of the crack would indicate the glaze did seep into the crack prior to the firing. Too bad, it was a really nice looking clock. Well, it's a good thing I saved that flopped bowl, because it turned out pretty cool. It is time to put this clock together. I took apart the Goodwill clocks to get the mechanisms, and this is where I noticed the difference in shaft lengths. If you're gonna make a clock, take into consideration shaft length. I didn't. Luckily, I had multiple clocks to choose from. I turned the clock face down, I put some really strong glue on the face of the mechanism, I lined it up with the hole and pressed the mechanism to the back of the clock. While holding the clock mechanism in place, I put a 12-pound steel thing on it just to keep pressure on so I could go and do something else. By something else, I mean deciding on what clock hands I'm going to use for this clock. I chose the longest hands to use on the clock. I think it would look funny with small stubby hands and a big clock. I didn't like the red hands on the blue of the clock, so I spray painted them with black. While I was waiting for the paint and glue to dry, I roughed up some copper wire with some sandpaper. I fed it through a button I put on the back of the clock. Using pliers, I make a loop to hang the clock by. Time to take the weight off the clock and attach the hands. I attach the hour hand first, then the minute hand, and then the sweeping second hand last. I turn the clock over and install a battery. I turn it back over to see that it's working. I am stoked. Yeah, cool, right? From a flopped bowl failure to an awesome wall clock. Sometimes I like when things get a little out of control and then something goes catastrophically wrong. Do I toss it? Do I save it? Sometimes it's good to just cut my losses and move on. Other times I apply a little creativity and a little determination and turn things around and produce something kind of cool like a wall clock. Now, in case you noticed, I repainted the hands from the clock, on the clock there. After painting them black in the video, they really just kind of seem to get lost, as where the white stands out and it actually kind of complements the clock. Now, the other clocks, in my opinion, aren't worth adding clock movements to. I mean, if you look at that, they're just warped. I didn't like them because the warp just really is no good for me. And also, I didn't like the finishes. I didn't like the way these things came out. This one here is Rutile Blue Rutile. And it went on really, really thick. There's actually 4 coats on here, and it came out like there was 1. So I'm really kind of curious as to what happened with this guy. This one here is actually a mason stain covered in clear, and it's a green mason stain. It just looks, you know, not so great. So I didn't like that one as much, but I still like the clocks. I think they're kind of interesting pieces. But instead of trashing them, I think what I'm going to do is put like a stick or a dowel. Hang on one second here. I did make this. So I can put like a little stick or a dowel in here. You can use like an old drumstick. You could even make something out of clay. And you know, as the sun goes over, you kind of see how let me see the monitor here. See how the shadow kind of works around. And this is really not, there we go. There's the shadow. See, as the sun works over, you'll see the thing, it'll move across. So a sundial, nice little yard feature, garden feature, so that way when you're out in the garden doing gardening stuff and you know, you can look at this and go, oh, it's time to go inside. If you enjoyed the video and you found it helpful, hit like. Share the video with someone who could benefit from it. Leave a comment if you have a question or you want to see me demonstrate something. Thank you very much for watching the video. Go have fun. Go play in the clay. Take care.